Hello, sir. Good to see you again.
Hello.
So we were just talking about our favorite Alan Ruck performances.
Oh.
So can you guess what they were?
No, I'm going to let you lay it on me.
Okay.
They're all pretty much the same to me.
Well, we started, obviously, with Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Okay.
Yeah. If that's okay.
If that's all right with
Yeah,
you.
I'm here.
If you're not sick of that
At
by
your
now.
behest, I'm here.
And I mentioned Speed, which is fun.
Yeah, it's a good
It's
movie.
a little fast for me, but
Yeah.
okay.
And I told them to ruck off. It had to be Succession.
Oh,
Conor
look at
Roy,
you.
brilliant. So, but we're so glad to have you here. Obviously, going back, you know, the film where we sort of first discovered you was Ferris Bueller, right? Do you remember sort of, you know, auditioning for John and sort of how that movie came to you and your expectations at the time? Certainly, you couldn't have imagined 40 years later we'd still be talking about it with such reverence.
No, really. It never occurred to me at the time. I actually started acting in Chicago. I went to the University of Illinois, and I went right up to Chicago after school because I didn't know anybody in LA or New York. And I knew a lot of people doing plays in Chicago. And during that time, I met John Hughes because he was going to make The Breakfast Club as a little indie. Right? And so I went in and I read for the Bender part, which is, you know, I mean, I wasn't going to get that anyway, but I read for him. And so I met John. And then he met Molly Ringwald during that process, and he put The Breakfast Club on the back burner, and he wrote 16 Candles for her in a weekend. Right. He was really, really fast, a very fast writer. And so then life moved on, and I went to New York to do Biloxi Blues, the Neil Simon show, and I met Matthew. We worked together for about, over 6 months, and then he was offered Ferris Bueller. And my agent at the time in New York tried to get me an audition. The casting people said, "Look, we know how old he is," because I was 28 years old at the time, and they said, my agent said, "He plays opposite Matthew every night on stage, and I look like they're the same age. Just read him." So I went in, I auditioned for the casting directors, and they were like, "Yeah, no, he's good." And then my callback was for John with Matthew, and so. Many times in the movies, you show up on the first day of work, and it's like, we're brothers. You know, it's like, this is your brother, go. Or it's like, this is your wife. You know, just instant relationship. Matthew and I didn't have to mess around with that. We were already friends, you know, so we had that going for us, and everything just fell into place. Originally, John had offered that movie to Anthony Michael Hall and to Emilio Estevez. And they were both they had done a few movies with John, and they were ready to move on. I can't remember what, he actually goes by Mike, Anthony Michael Hall. I can't remember what he was doing, but Emilio was doing Repo Man. Right. And he was kind of moving into adult roles, and, you know. So every time I see Emilio, I want to give him a kiss on the head, just for turning that down. But that's how that came about.
I can't imagine two different directors than Alex Cox and John Hughes.
No. Yeah, very exciting. Yeah,
so
an interesting discussion would be.
You were doing a lot of theater at the time. How was the transition to film acting for you? Because obviously acting for the stage is very different than doing film. How hard was it for you to make that step?
The first movie I ever did was called Bad Boys with Sean Penn. Sure. And my performance in that movie is so big you can see it from the surface of the moon. You know, and it took me a while to understand that sometimes you just need to sit still and breathe and think, and the camera does a lot of the work for you. So I learned, I took some lumps. I did that movie, and then I did another one called Class with Rob Lowe and Johnny Cusack and some people. And
Jacqueline Bisset.
Oh, yeah, and Cliff Robertson. So I was kind of like, you know, the apprenticeship of Alan Ruck. And I took some lumps, and I saw myself on the screen. I was like, that was really bad. And so little by little, I kind of got it together. So by the time we did Ferris, I felt like I knew what I was doing. I feel like I'm sitting
it showed.
Back.
Would you have, you know, all the world's stage here?
So. I want to be able to look at you guys.
I'm sorry.
No, good.
We're sorry that you have to look at us, actually, is the issue.
I just have to say, I think you guys were shooting Ferris Bueller in the same time and same area where I was just finishing high school. So I got out of high school in '85.
Okay, yeah.
And so when that came out, it was a sort of a direct connection to my school days. And because it's the same area, it was just so representative of how that life was. And that was an amazing thing to see how John Hughes sort of captured the feeling of being in high school in Illinois, basically.
He, I think that was his particular genius. He really had a feeling for young people, and I mean, I remember going into record shops with him when we were just rehearsing before we started shooting, and they all knew him, and everybody knew him.
Because he would buy these records to play while he was writing the script.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he was up on all the bands. I didn't know anything. I didn't know who was, like current. He knew everything. He was really, he kind of never grew up that way.
Yeah.
He just kind of stayed in that zone. And that was part of his gift, that he treated young people like fully formed human beings, even though we're not. We're 17, 18 years old. But he honored their hopes and dreams and their struggles, and didn't he didn't talk down to kids,
Yeah.
He just let it all breathe. And that's why a lot of teen comedies since forever have just, they don't age well, because they're so time specific. And, it's like making fun of kids, all the obsessions with sex and status and everything. And some of those things are in John's films, but he really treats them like complete human beings, these kids. And I think that's why they last.
Well, the other thing I think he does that's different is he treats the adults like real human beings, too. I mean, there are jerks in those movies for sure, but then there are adult characters who have depth and reality.
Yeah.
Which I think is one of those things that, again, when you're talking about a John Hughes film, you go, oh, right. Like, that's why something like The Breakfast Club persists, even though culturally it's out of sync.
Yeah, yeah. No, he was an excellent writer and fast. He wrote Bueller in a week.
Wow.
So he just he once said, "Remember when you were in high school and you read Walden Pond, and you were supposed to keep a journal?" He said, "I never stopped doing that."
Wow.
And apparently his sons have all these moleskin notebooks that he would carry with him constantly, and he'd see something, get an idea, and he'd write it down. And apparently his writing is about like this, so he's really filling pages with lots of ideas.
It's almost psychotic, actually.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's an obsession,
Yeah. I got to work with him for a couple months when he was producing the remake of Absent-Minded Professor
Okay.
In Chicago. And that was such an amazing sort of connection, because he was just sort of free-forming and just trying to figure out what he wanted to do. Yeah. And it was so fascinating to watch how his process was going. And I'm so sad we lost him so early, because it was unbelievably sudden.
Yeah, I mean, I think he had stopped smoking a long while before he died, but when I was working with him, he smoked 5 packs a day.
Yeah.
So, and of Carltons. Remember those?
The
There's
unkindest cut
no
of all.
tobacco in them. They're paper and chemicals. That's all in. So he wasn't doing himself any favors.
What was the acting process like with him? I mean, as a director, I mean, obviously different directors have different styles. There are guys who basically have set up a shot and then you're on your own. There are guys who will sit and have long conversations with you about who you are in the scene and what you want. Like, what was your relationship like with him as an actor? How did that translate onto the screen?
It was pretty easy. I found that the better the writers are, the less messed up they get if you change the wording. If you extemporize, or if there's some writers that they want you basically to take their pages and frame them and put them on the wall.
Right.
And I can't write. I'm not a writer. So, and without the writers, we have nothing. It takes somebody sitting down in front of a typewriter or an iPad or a legal pad and just imagining a world and putting it on where we can all see it. But I found that the better the writers are, the more they want you to kind of improvise and extemporize and maybe, put it in your own words. It's whatever works,
Right.
And so John was very good that way. And the way we shot Bueller was pretty much the same way we shot Succession, and that's we would do it as written, several takes, and then they would come up with alternate lines, and John did that. And then in Succession, they would have pages, especially for somebody like Kieran, pages of alternate lines. We got that one, that's in the can, do you want to try this? And you want to try all of them, because they're all so good. But you'd pick out a couple. And then my favorite director on Succession was Mark Mylod, and he would always say, okay guys, freebie. And that was the last take, and it was like whatever came out of your mouth. And sometimes it was crap, but sometimes every now and then somebody would just take a left turn, and if you just hung with them, you might get something, And because you have the framework of the scene in your DNA by that point. You've done it half a dozen times, 10 times. So by the time you get to that last just improvised take, the bones of the scene are in you, and it just, whatever happens, happens, and it's a really fun way to work.
And if the machine is rolling, you want to embrace those accidents and try and make them happen.
It's just whatever life you can capture is maybe, happy accidents are maybe better than anything you can imagine,
Well, since you mentioned Succession, I want to ask you about, you play a character that you have to play with utter conviction, and yet, to the outside world, to us watching, he's kind of a putz, no offense, right?
No, no.
Yeah. So,
You know that he's not actually the character.
And so, obviously you want to approach it with complete conviction. You don't condescend to the character. He's authentic. Can you sort of talk about that process of sort of getting the role and then finding that character? Because some of the most memorable quotes from that series are Connor's, and some of the long diatribes that he goes off on, and then ultimately running for president and the relationship with Willa. It's just utterly fascinating.
If left to my own devices, I will always screw things up. The play that I did with Matthew in New York, Biloxi Blues, I was in Chicago, and they said, they want you to go to New York to audition for Neil Simon. I said, I'm not going to go. And my agent said, what are you talking about? I said, you've sent me to New York 3 times to audition for stuff, and every time I've spent $300 or whatever it was in 1984, to fly People's Express, and then I don't get the job, and I'm out the $300. And so she called Manny Eisenberg, the producer, and said, Alan he wants you to fly him. And Manny said, I tell you what, he said, if he doesn't get the job, I'll reimburse him for his airfare. And so my joke is, I don't know if they really wanted me or just Manny didn't want to pay the $300. But with Succession, I was working on this thing in Chicago with Gina Davis. It was the TV version of The Exorcist. And I would fly home for long weekends. And my wife is an actor. She's very good. Her name is Mireille Enos. And she was doing this glamour show, this eyelash show called The Catch. And they were working like 15 and 16-hour days. It was brutal. And we had a nanny, but she would come home, and she was mom, and she was played out. She was worn out. I came home this one weekend, going to go back home on Monday, and she said, on Monday morning, come to Mommy and Me music class with me and the baby. And I said, I'm there. And then Monday morning, my manager calls up and says, hey, I got an audition for you for an HBO show. And I said, honey, it's HBO. And she bursts into tears. They popped out of her eye. And I said, Mark, I'm sorry, I can't go. I promised my wife that I'd do something else. And so we go to the music class, and you have to leave your phone outside, and you bang tambourines for an hour, and then I came out, my phone had exploded with go to, oh God, I'm having a senior moment, I just forgot his name, Adam McKay's house. Before you fly to Chicago, go to Adam's house, because they want to see you. So I went to his house, and I said, Adam, I really don't know the material. He said, make it up. He said, you know the situation, right? I said, yeah. He said, just make it up. So I just started improvising with the casting director, and then by the time I landed in Chicago a couple hours later, they told me they wanted me to do the job. So it's just, so it just takes, apparently, it takes a lot of people to put Alan in the right place, to get things done. But
did Adam McKay pay for your flight?
But with the whole thing with him, it said in the little, email I got from the agency, it said, this part will grow over time. not in line to succeed in the corporation, but part will grow over time. I'm great, you know. And then during the audition, there was this line that said, Dad, there's this job I want. It's called President of the United States. And I looked at Adam McKay and I said, so he's putting the old man on, right? And he's like, oh no. He's deadly serious. And then I knew who this guy was, you know, because you're given all these inane things to say, and you're like, who says that kind of stuff? So it was clear that this boy was damaged, you know, and old enough. And, you know, something that happens in these dynastic families is if you are not perfect, you kind of get pushed to the back of the family photo, you know what I mean? And so clearly he was on the spectrum somewhere, and ADHD, all that stuff was going on with Connor, all kinds of, not narcissism specifically, but what do they call that? It's on the same level as schizophrenia, delusional disorder. Clearly this boy was damaged, you know, and some of those families, they're just like, no, he's fine, you know, he's fine. And they didn't really address the problem, and there were all the things that happened with Connor's mother. She was in and out of mental institutions. She had a pill problem, an alcohol problem. So you just got the feeling with this kid that his father divorced the mother when he was maybe like 8 years old, and then he was either living at home with his really challenged mom, or he was at boarding school. So that's a lonely, lonely life. And so he just figured that this guy, there was always money. There was never any love, but there was always money. So he created his own world from the time he was very young, and the money was there to do it. So you wind up with a person who's in his 50s, who's never worked a job, who's never had to show up, nobody's ever had to count on him for anything. He's lost, you know, and that was me.
Did you take everything off the page, or did you do research on like the Murdochs and a lot of families like this and people of great wealth and how they lived their lives, or you read any biographies, or was it all just strictly off the page and from like Mark?
It was pretty much off the page. I read a little bit about the Murdoch family, and who's the eldest daughter? What's her name? She's got a very strange name like Prunella.
The one you never hear about.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was the Connor of that family, you know, not interested in the business, or if she was incapable of sort of operating on that level. But mostly I just took it from what Jesse and the writers gave us, because it was pretty clear.
And when the show, did you ever expect it to become this cultural phenomenon that it became? I mean, with all the Emmys, with all the attention that was lavished on it, you know, and of course, living this kind of lavish lifestyle, the way that the network treats you when they're sending you to all the events, but these incredible houses you filmed in, all these cars, and then it ends, and it's what was that experience like for you?
Well, I enjoy the doing of it. I generally don't watch myself. I did watch Succession just because it was so good and everybody was so wonderful. But I love the doing of it. I like being on set. I like it's kind of like playing a sport, because you don't know exactly what's going to happen. It's very exciting, you know. So it's a wonderful job. It really is. While we were doing it, the first season, I knew we did the pilot, and then we didn't start filming until almost a year later, for different reasons. But while we were doing it, I just knew it was excellent. And then when we premiered, half of the critics said, "These people are awful. There's nobody to root for. I don't want to spend any time with these people. I feel like I need to take a shower." Whatever, and all that stuff is true, you know. But I have never had a problem with watching shows about disgusting people, because if we were making a show about the Nazis, hopefully we wouldn't be rooting for anybody, you know. Oh, that Himmler! If only he'd made better choices, you know. I mean, you know. So I didn't kind of understand that. And then by about the middle of the season, about the 5th or 6th episode, the same critics are like, "Wow, Succession has really found its voice." It's like, no, you just caught up. We knew what we were doing from the beginning. And they, you know, it's a group of completely miserable human beings. They have every reason to be happy, everything they could ever imagine, and they're just awful. They're just awful. And so that was fun. It's just fun to play some, despicable people.
And there was that odd debate whether it was a comedy or a drama. Clearly, it was a drama, but with comedy like life.
Yeah.
But
It's so funny that we have these categories. It's like comedy, drama. I mean, there's no TV shows that we call tragedies. But yeah, there's a lot of these things now. Like The Bear. The Bear is considered to be a comedy in all the award categories. It's a pretty serious show, It's just a half-hour format, so it's not the typical dramatic format. But I think there's a lot of these shows now that they call them dramedies, and like you say, I just think they just call it life, because it's mixed up like our lives are.
Now, our podcast is called The Inglorious Treksperts, so we talk about Star Trek a lot. I've been told that you were a starship captain.
For one brief shining moment.
was it that shining?
Well, it was shiny just because, Star Trek is shiny.
Yeah.
But, it was a shiny ship that didn't work.
Till Tuesday.
But
How did that come to you? I mean, it's funny. We talked about John Hughes. Ironically, John Hughes actually had written a Star Trek treatment for Paramount back in his Nate and Hayes days. He wrote a sequel to Star Trek II about Khan that never got made. And then, so there is a lineage. And then how did Star Trek come to you with Generations? Was it strictly an audition? Was it an offer situation? Did you think, I'm going in to play, Captain Kirk Mark II, and then you find out this is a guy who's kind of screwing things up? And
this is back in the 90s, so we still had fax machines. And my agent called and said, I have an audition for you for a Star Trek picture. Great. So the pages come through the fax machine, and I was like, who am I supposed to audition for? Harriman. And I thought they'd, have me audition for some like alien with broccoli coming out of his head, or I didn't think, because I just don't consider myself to be Starship Commander material. When I used to shave and look in the mirror, I just didn't say Starship Commander, baby. So I was like, oh, okay, whatever. And I went in. The audition went very well. The director was a guy named David Carson, a really talented British guy. And the audition went well, and he said, well, hello, Alan Ruck. And I said, well, great. And then they say they want me to do the part. So then I had to make up kind of a backstory in my mind. It's like, how would a guy who's clearly unqualified for this position get the position? And I thought, well, there's human beings involved, so that means there's the possibility of corruption. And I figured I came from a wealthy family, and this was kind of purchased for me in one way or another as a stepping stone in a political career. And it was, that whole gig was supposed to be take the Enterprise B, like go around Pluto, and we'll have cocktails,
Right.
And we'll do some, we'll have some photo ops, and that was it.
So it's basically Matthew Broderick in Glory.
Well, kind of, yeah.
Or it's like Succession. Instead of saying, Dad, I want this job, President of the United States. Dad, I want this job, Starship Captain.
Yeah, exactly. And look, they sent. I mean, he didn't have a clue, but they sent him out with a half-assed ship.
Yeah.
I mean, nothing worked. Nothing worked. And so it was. Obviously, as a plot device to launch Captain Kirk into his last glorious battle. And half of the Star Trek community hate me for killing Kirk, and the other half adore me for killing Kirk.
Was it fun to do?
Yeah, it was. I mean, I'm old enough that I was a little boy when the show came on the air, and I was a huge fan of the show. I think I was in the 5th grade or 6th grade, and so Harriman was supposed to be starstruck by, Scotty and Chekhov and Kirk. I didn't have to act, because that was me.
Did they let you keep the uniform?
No, and I didn't want it.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It was itchy.
Ah, yeah.
Right in here.
We can get you one in the hall.
I'm good.
we, you know, a lot of people, they grow up, you know, wanting to be, they dream of stardom, and you've had a very, very successful career as a character actor, which has allowed you to do so much, moving from Succession and all these different things. But I mean, when you look at something like Speed, it's so interesting to look at somebody like Keanu, who we were talking about, you know, he's going to star in an action movie for 20th Century Fox. It's like, Keanu? You know, this light comedian stoner guy, you know, even in Dangerous Liaisons, he was the only one who got terrible reviews, right? So, and then he's terrific, and you have a wonderful role in that film. Tell us a little bit about doing Speed and working with the crazy Jean
movie.
Bavant. Yeah.
The movie, not just doing Speed.
I missed it. What did he say?
He said, "Tell us something about doing Speed," and I said, "The movie."
Oh. Thank you. Thank you for repeating things for an elderly gentleman. So Speed was great because the 105 freeway had just been completed in Los Angeles.
But not opened
Not
yet.
opened. So that was our backlot. So we had, I don't know how many miles of freeway. That was our backlot. And we had at least half a dozen different buses. And one that we used a lot, Sandy had a dummy wheel that didn't do anything, and the driver actually sat on the roof. They had it rigged. So his name was Gil. I can't remember his last name, but he was the stunt driver up on the roof. And Keanu he's one of the good guys of show business. I mean, he's really like, you hear about these things that he does. He's just like, he finds out somebody needs money and he writes him a check for $10,000. I mean, he's just, that's who he is. And he's quiet and he's unassuming, and but he's very physically capable. And he, just as a young man, he rode a lot of motorcycles, and he's a very athletic dude. So that role was sort of perfect for him at that time. And like you say, it opened a whole world for him because he had, been, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure kind of guy. We had a bus that they called the Pope Mobile, because on the front of the bus they had welded a cage that was covered in plexiglass, and they put 3 cameras up there. And again, the guy was driving on the roof, so that way they could get close-ups of Keanu and Sandy and everybody else like that. The grips on the show were fabricators, and they came up with ingenious ways of turning the handrails in a bus up here like this. They eliminated the top bracket and reinforced the lower bracket, and they turned that into a dolly track. Wow. And they built a custom-made dolly track that they hung a camera from on bungees so they could be up here looking at Sandy and then whip to the back of the bus like this, So there was a lot of innovation going on, And the bus was only half the movie, but it was, I guess it was about 6 weeks. Our part of the movie was about 6 weeks. And then we spent on the 105 freeway, and we just had a hell of a good time.
There are a lot of crazy filmmakers like Otto Preminger going back to Otto, and then of course Paul Verhoeven is great in a wonderful way. Jean Bavant has that reputation as being sort of larger than life crazy filmmaker as well. Started as a great DP. What was he like to work with?
Well, this is interesting. So he was this acclaimed director of photography, and then he got this job to direct this movie. And all the crew people were like, one of us made it to the top, So they could not do enough for this guy. And, sometimes he'd be like, no, I operate. No, I'm operating. I shoot this one. I got it, And very hands-on. And I loved him. And then a few years later, Twister came along.
Right.
And he was under a lot of pressure from people like Steven Spielberg and Kathleen Kennedy and different people. There were a lot of people breathing down his neck on this big movie. And he was not his best self on that movie. And they paired him up with a director of photography named Don Burgess. Don is so meticulous that he does his own storyboards. Like there's the storyboards that are done for the movie by the production designer, right? And then, but he would do his own, and he had his own shot list, and he's pretty much plan your work and work your plan. And Jan is like, no, I'm doing it. No, forget that, fuck that. I'm going to do it, you know.
Yeah.
And there's also something about Jan is that he can't hold a walkie-talkie in his hand without it shorting out. It must be, I swear to God, because we were out in Oklahoma, out in these, you know, like wheat fields that were just like all mud. And they would hand him a walkie-talkie, and it would just stop working. And he would go, fucking hell, shit! And he would throw the thing. And those are worth like $1,000, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, that was years ago. They're worth more now. Fucking hell, shit! Throw the thing out, and we'd go splook in the mud somewhere, you know, and then some poor PA would have to go dig it out and, like, clean it up, you know. I saw him once with one in each hand, and he was like, fuck, 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 you know? So he was under a lot of pressure, and then, you know, he was having a hard time, and then he and Don just did not get along, and so maybe about halfway through the movie, Don quit and took half the crew with him. And so then they hired this guy named Jack Green, and Jack Green had been Clint Eastwood's DP for years and years and years. A wonderful guy, and he brought all his people and finished up the movie. And you know, it made money. It turned out just fine. It was a good picture, and it made all the money back and then some. So it was considered to be a success. But it was a rough go. Oh, and this was the other thing: is everybody. I show up in Oklahoma. We were in this city called Ponca City, Oklahoma, which is like nowhere. I mean, it's right near the border of Kansas, and it's a very tiny, teeny town. And all the other actors are like, you worked with Jan before. What's he like? And I'm like, he's the greatest guy, because I had such a wonderful experience with him. And then he just was terrible. You know, he was really unhappy, and he was in a bad way. And everybody's like, oh, yeah, Al, your good buddy Jan. You want to hear what he did today? And I'm like, I'm sorry, you know. That was my experience.
You know, before you got here, we were talking about our favorite Alan Ruck roles, and one of the things Ashley mentioned was Sean Crouch's wonderful show, The Exorcist, which you alluded to earlier, which you were terrific in. And I think people had certain expectations. How do you do a TV version of The Exorcist? And it turned out really well. Do you have a role or a performance or a movie or a play that you did that's like underrated? You know, obviously people want to talk to you about Ferris and they want to talk to you about now Succession and all this stuff, but is there something you feel like is overlooked in your oeuvre that you're very proud of?
My oeuvre? I didn't know I had an oeuvre. No, not really. I wish I had something clever or interesting to say right now, but not really. I mean, I did a play in 1984 in Chicago called Billy Bishop Goes to War. And I was very proud of that. And I mean, you know, a handful of people saw it in Chicago back then. And it was a one-man show. It was me and a piano player. And I had a great time doing that. And then when I was younger, I always wanted to play Tom in A Glass Menagerie. Mm-hmm. But even though it's a memory play, I'm too old now to do that. But no, I just take things as they come. And there hasn't really been anything that, well, there's a couple things I'm ashamed of, but but only one or two.
Do you sing? Did you ever do any musicals?
I did, but when I was young, I could really sing. My father was a singer, and my sister was a singer, and I never learned to read music, but I had a good ear. So, yeah. Like in high school choir, they would just play me my part one time, and then I would know it. And I went away to college, and people said, you have a nice voice, you ought to take voice lessons. And I thought it was the dumbest thing I ever heard. It was like, why should I take lessons to learn to do something I already know how to do? You know, a little vain. So I never did that. And I've been in 2 musicals in my career. I did this very strange musical in Chicago called One Shining Moment, which was, it was like an R-gang comedy decided to put on a tribute to JFK.
Wow.
I mean, it was really bizarre, but it paid well. And then about 20 years ago, I toured around in The Producers.
Nice.
I did that. But right before that, I had a health scare. Right after 9/11, I had a health scare, and I was intubated.
Right.
And it stretched the living hell out of my vocal cords.
Ooh.
So they don't meet up anymore. So I can't hit the high notes. So them days is over.
So Showboat it is.
No, not yet.
I have to say, the first Neil Simon play I ever saw was Biloxi Blues in New York, and I wish I'd saved the playbill. But what a great what a great play and what a great performance that I loved it back then.
It was fun. I'd been in Chicago, and I'd done little pieces in movies and some TV shows and stuff, but mostly did plays. And I just felt like I was in the theater. And then when I got the Broadway show, I was like, oh no, I'm in show business. Right. All of a sudden, the stakes were a lot higher. And opening night in New York, we'd gotten huge laughs on the road. We were in Los Angeles and then San Francisco, and the play was in real good shape, and big laughs, and it was a lot of fun. And opening night in New York, it was like you could hear crickets. Just a very reserved crowd, tough crowd, whatever. And they were enjoying it. They just weren't very vocal, and we were really shook up, you know. And so at intermission, I was backstage with Matthew and Wayne Rogers. You remember Wayne Rogers from MASH? Yeah, he was one of the investors in that show. And he was backstage, and he just looked at us, and he said, Matthew, I don't know. If I was you, I don't think I'd go back out there. And then he walks off. And Matthew says,
oh, my God.
What does that mean? But it was a big break for me. That was the only time I'd ever been offered a job on the spot, and that's, you know, it goes back to my joke about Manny Eisenberg. But I worked very hard on that audition, and I auditioned for Manny and Neil and for Gene Saks, the director, and they said, look, come back after lunch and look at these two scenes and come back after lunch. And I had to sing in that play, and I was very nervous, so I asked them if I could sit down while I sang because my knees were literally knocking. And they said, yeah, sure, whatever. And I sat down and I sang, and then I did another scene. And Gene Saks came up to the stage, and he said, I tell you what, just start singing every day and get more comfortable with it, you know, and you'll be all right. And I said, okay. And then I walked off stage, and the casting director said, wait. And she came up to see me in the wings, and she said, did you realize that Gene was offering you the part? And I said, I thought maybe, but I didn't want to make an ass of myself, you know, and overreach. So that was the only time I've been offered a job on the spot.
And it's amazing because those plays are so good, that and Brighton Beach Memoirs, but they don't translate to film. Like the film adaptations of those movies are not very
plays.
Good.
Yeah, they're definitely plays. Yeah.
Well, I know you guys have a lot of questions, so we have, I think, a mic, so you can come up and ask Alan some questions.
Oh, no, there's children out here, and I've been cussing.
He didn't mean it.
That's par for the course with us, honestly.
Well, he wasn't Succession, so.
There you go.
I have to get down. I can't really see you guys. Hi. Here,
There we go. That's better.
Let's bring it down just a little bit. Yeah.
This is your chance to emote.
You can use mine.
Oh, that's all right. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can.
Okay. Well, Mr. Ruck, it was good seeing you earlier today at the autograph table. And I know you've only done one official Star Trek movie, but you've also done some fan fiction on Star Trek as well, too. And I'm wondering if you feel like maybe your character has been redeemed a bit from that role, and are you interested in doing any other Star Trek fan fiction?
Well, never say never. I don't know where. I don't know where that character goes. To tell you the truth, I don't know what the next step would be in that story. But never say never, you know. And it was fun to do the Of Gods and Men. I got to work with Walter again and Nichelle, who I'd never met before then, and Tim Russ directed that movie. So it was a bunch of good people. But never say never.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
That was up in Port Henry, New York.
Yes, it was.
I've been there. I directed one of those episodes.
Were you in that old car dealership?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so this.
And the horribly hot transporter room upstairs.
Oh my God! So we filmed this thing I guess it was July, and it was in this old car dealership that had a metal roof. And every time it rained, it sounded like people were dumping barrels of marbles on the roof.
Yeah.
So we had to shut down, and there was no air conditioning. And it was hotter than hell. And then at night, we would go out to our cars between takes to turn on the air conditioning, except there were skunks everywhere.
Yeah.
So this is some of the glamour of show business that I want you to know about. Hi.
I was a big fan of Twister in the 90s. It was one of those that was on TV a lot. So I just wanted to thank you because as a navigator in the car, I was always the person saying, no, trust me, Rabbit is good, Rabbit is wise.
Oh, yeah.
But I was wondering, was Michael Crichton one of those writers who was more precious about his words?
I never met him, so I don't know what that was. And then it seemed to me a lot of different people wrote on that.
Okay.
But I never got to meet him. So that might be true, but I don't know.
And also on that film, you got to work with the great late Philip Seymour Hoffman and Bill Paxton.
Yeah.
Do you have any stories about working with them that you want to share?
Well, it's just that I was talking with somebody earlier. There's some people that have so much life force in them, you know, and then when they pass away, it doesn't really sink in, you know. So that was true with Bill and Phil, that they had so much energy, and they had so many great ideas that it's hard to believe that they're not here anymore, you know. The guy that created Spin City with Gary David Goldberg, another one that was just bigger than life. And so I don't think of them as being gone. And I mean, they've been gone for a long time, but I just, no, Philip was funny. The thing about Philip is that he was about this wide. I mean, he had these huge shoulders, right? And so Jan would say, everybody, find the camera. Come on, get in the picture. Let me see your face. Find the camera, you know? And then Phil would come in and just go like this, and two people would go flying. You know, because he's just big and strong. And it was just like, well, oh, Phil's here.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you so much for your picture earlier.
Oh, sure.
So, Ferris Bueller, my favorite work of yours.
Thank you.
What was your favorite line that Cameron said?
I don't know that I had a favorite line. I think the favorite bit that we did was Matthew and I had done Biloxi Blues in New York, and our director, Gene Sachs, was, well, younger than I am now, but I mean, at the time, he was an older guy, and we were always afraid we were going to give him a heart attack because he would get so pissed off at us for screwing around. And he'd say, I don't believe you're soldiers in World War II. God damn it, you know? And Matthew is double jointed. So, and Gene had this one finger that wouldn't straighten out. And Matthew somehow can hold his finger like that. And so Matthew would walk around backstage before the show saying, I don't believe you're soldiers, God damn it, you know? And then, so then on Bueller, Hughes said, I need an authoritarian kind of dad voice, so come up with something. So I didn't tell Matthew what I was going to do until we started shooting. So that was me doing an imitation of Matthew, doing an imitation of Gene Sachs.
Well, I should say you do.
Very good.
Thank you so much.
Hello.
Hi.
I had read somewhere that for the movie Ferris, that for the parade part where he's singing and stuff, that was, you guys did it in a real parade. And
Yeah.
You guys just like came in, just got at the end of it or something, and
Yeah, it was,
I was curious if that was true or not.
it is true. There's a name for that parade. I just always call it the German American Day Parade, but it has like the von Steuben.
Yeah, the von Steuben parade.
Yeah. And so one Saturday was the real parade, and we had our float with Matthew on it, and we would, you know, the cameras were set up, and we would come chugging down the road and get past the cameras and then go around the block and then get back in, the, you know, and we did that for one whole Saturday. And then the next Saturday, we did all the close-ups of him singing on the float with the girls and all that stuff. and all the little scenes with like Mia and I. We did all that the next Saturday. And then Kenny Ortega was the choreographer and the second unit director, and all those things of like the people dancing, like on the scaffolding and all that stuff. He did that over a number of days. So that all the footage for that parade sequence probably took about 4 or 5 days of shooting. Yeah, sure. Hi.
Hi, Stephanie.
Hi.
You create all these larger-than-life characters. Which one would you say was the easiest because you're most alike? Please don't say Succession, but...
Well, Kieran, we were halfway through working on Succession, and he said, you know, I don't think they knew who Connor was until you showed up. It's you. That's what Kieran, I said, oh, thanks, buddy. Thank you. Thank you. But I don't know. I don't know who's like me. I don't know. I really can't say. There's little bits of me in everything. I think it's use different parts of yourself, you know. But I really couldn't say which is most like me. I don't have enough perspective because I'm stuck in here with the rest of them. Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
My pleasure.
This was a lot of fun.
And please, don't go anywhere.
Thank you, Alan. They're gonna
GalaxyCon tradition,
Yeah, they will.
come to the front,
They're gonna
get a
take
big group selfie, which is, I guess, an USSY or whatever the hell the technical term is, with Alan. Hey, great.
Pleasure.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
That was so much fun. Come on up. You're not allowed to leave. There's a fire code rule or something. They tell you have to come forward and pack yourselves in like sardines so that in case of a fire, it's more difficult to escape.